You ask good questions.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Thank you. And you're doing great. This is so inspiring. I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. We still have people joining us a couple hours later, which I'm not
Good.
surprised, but it's always pleasant. Patricia writes, there's so much to consider with each family and individual, so it will look very different in each case as far as their future and what will and could happen. I have older children. I have some older children that already told us they would take care of younger siblings with special needs. Lots of communication always. Jana writes, these are all hard issues I'm dealing with. Who will help my son after I'm gone? He does have 7 siblings, but still hard stuff. Thanks for joining us, Jana and Patricia. So I'd like to welcome everyone back for part 3 of this interview with JaLynn Prince, talking about raising 3 children and one, Madison, who experiences autism or has autism, along with her husband, Greg Prince, who we've had on Mormon Stories several times in the past. And parts 1 and 2 talked about their stories raising Madison and then their experiences with Madison, in the Mormon context for part 2 and as an adult. What I'd like to do now, just for the remaining time we have for the next 30 minutes or so, is address some of the questions and comments that we have
Good.
from our listeners.
Would love that.
There's a lot of intense kind of questions and comments, and
Good. Bring forward.
Yeah, let's talk through some of them. Becky Reed Linford wrote, love to Greg and JaLynn Prince as they fight for a positive, loving, supportive future for their son. They are miracles.
Back at you, Becky. You're wonderful.
Do you know Becky?
I sure do.
Okay, so shout out to Becky. Is it true that Utah has one of the highest prevalence rates for autism? And if it is, do we have any idea why?
Well, that is another very good question. Let me answer some of this broadly. Through the CDC, it looks like the prevalence rate is a bit higher. There's a couple of other measurements, and it depends on how that is measured. If it's measured through school records, if it's measured through any one of a number of other assets. Through the CDC, they poll 15 states, and then they take an average. And Utah and New Jersey were 2 of the highest rates with that one. But right now, it looks like about 2% of our population is on the spectrum.
So and as you mentioned, the stats are all different, but the report that I pulled from the CDC said about 1 in 68 children have autism.
Right. Those are a little bit older.
Those are older, so
stats, and that's
okay.
through the CDC, but the Department of Health has a slightly other metric that they've used.
So
but
is it more?
Still,
are more current numbers? Is it more or less prevalent? Or do you even remember?
Well, if it's 1 in 50, it's more than 1 in 67.
Okay. Yeah.
But some people have said, 1 in 47.
Okay,
And I don't know where those numbers come from.
There's always a range.
Yeah.
And then this report said that autism is almost, is it three times more likely in males than in females?
I think it's more like 4.
4
to
times.
5.
Yeah, 4 to 5. Okay, yeah. So it's 4 to 5 times more likely in boys than in girls. So here it says 1 in 42 for boys and 1 in 189 for girls.
Right.
So boys, that shows that there's some sort of biological clear.
Well, and it could be because there are many different biological markers that can react to one another, biological factors that can react with one another. And whether autism is more prevalent, I would say there may be an indicator in the state of Utah because there's a higher birth rate.
But these are ratios. So
well, those are ratios right there. But you were also asking
right.
about the prevalence in the state of Utah, too.
Yeah.
And there may be something about the age of the parents when a child is born. And if you have a larger family, your child producing years are going to be spread out more.
So possibly the older a parent gets, the more likely autism might
And
appear.
there are some theories on that. But if we look at it, and I know people cringe when I say this sometimes, but let me use the example with cancer many years ago. There was a big C, and everything kind of fit under it. You know, you would operate for it, and there were few options for the treatment. Now we've gotten so specific that we've had loved ones who've had very rare types of cancer that they can identify sometimes the causality, but they can find out how to best treat something very specifically. And that there's a difference between melanoma and carcinoma and breast cancer and prostate cancer and leukemia and on and on and on. We may find that type of thing with autism, and there's some breakthrough bits of research coming. And it looks like there could be a genetic component. There could be some things that are in the environment, or maybe have been in the environment 1 and 2 generations earlier that are being manifest now.
Things like toxins or pollution, possibly, right?
Right, and we may not know what that is, because how do we go back and look and see what maybe my grandmother was exposed to either in Norway or here? So if it happens to be my grandmother. So there's a lot of different variables. There may be other conditions. Maybe it's something during gestational period. It's not necessarily clear, but it does look like there are different types of autisms. There are some that have more gut problems, and there's a lot of sensitivities to touch and foods and so forth. There's other populations or parts of the population that those aren't the case. So the prevalence rate and the type of thing is extremely variable. It seems that there has been an increase to a degree, but people weren't necessarily keeping the records. And then with the DSM that you had mentioned, they have picked up Asperger's and put it into the pot with autism, which makes sense in some ways. It probably sells a lot more DSMs as well.
But as I understand it, they've tried to sort of neutralize or eliminate the term Asperger's, and they've called it now high-functioning autism.
Well, yes, but there's a lot of individuals that identify themselves as being Aspie or Asperger's, and there's a lot of different nomenclatures. We can maybe get into that in a minute. That want to maintain that identity because they feel that that describes them more without qualifying different types of things. And I think people have a right to identify as a select.
And I think I caught you not liking the term high functioning because it implies low functioning, which is kind of
right. And
insulting.
Then some people will get into, no, it's the level of supports, high support needs or low support needs. And there are people that want to be called autists rather than autistic.
Right.
Or some people want to be referred to as an individual who has autism rather than
you
being
say the person
autistic.
Before the description, right?
Right, person before the description, or some people say it's so much a part of me that, yes, I'm autistic. I'm not a person with autism. That's who I am. So sometimes within our foundation, we will find that we will word things differently. So either we're equal opportunity acknowledgers or offenders, depending on how you're looking at it. But it's kind of a fluid language as it is with many different populations and how they try to identify themselves.
Sure. And just to conclude, New Jersey, according to this report, has the highest prevalence rates of 1 in 46, according to this report. North Carolina, 1 in 53, and then Utah's 1 in 54. And I imagine those numbers change, but...
But now they're thinking 1 in 50.
Yeah. Nationwide or in Utah?
From the latest word that I have had,
Right.
and I still need to look at more of those stats, but it's right around the 2%.
For the nation? Mm-hmm. Okay. So it might be more prevalent in Utah now than 1 in 52. 1 in 54.
Maybe, and it may be about the same.
Okay. So you've already addressed this, but Medi writes, as an autist myself, so... hi, Medi. Shout out to you.
And I like her writing. I've been
She's a
following
great
her
writer.
on Facebook.
Yeah, several
Very
books.
impressed with her.
Super smart, super good writer. Really national national author.
Yes.
Bishop's Wife, I think, is one of her most known books.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
She said, I'd like to know about JaLynn's views on being healed in the next life. I found this doctrine personally thorny, a rejection of my way of being in the world, but recognize caregivers may feel differently. You've already addressed this, but is there anything else you would add to Medi's question/statement?
Yeah, where is it that we allow ourselves to have uniqueness and value that? And maybe we need to examine what our prejudices are, saying if someone's not like me, either they're different or less or something else. Maybe it's just different but equal, and that should be acknowledged. And with people trying to make comments like, well, you're not quite like the rest of us, but on the other side you will be. If somebody has unusual abilities and a good self-identity, why would they want to say, oh, well, maybe I'm not right, I'm going to be better somewhere else? Whereas they may be very valid right here, right now, and doing the things that they should be doing and can be doing. It's just acknowledging people where they are, and I think we need to do more of that.
The first time I remember thinking about this was when I heard a friend named Clark Pingree, who's gay, say, who says I want to have my gayness taken away in the afterlife? Has your experience with autism made you more or less sensitive to the LGBT population, both within the church and outside?
Oh, it's made me aware of so many other things. Because how can I defend a population and represent them well with ignoring others? And when I can see that within the scope of creation, people are created differently, who am I to say where that begins and ends? But I can have the responsibility of loving, caring for, and supporting people. And I think that's what my obligation is. And it's not defined by gender, it's not defined by disability or ability.
Yeah. Makes sense. Mark Peterson writes, the two hardest things I've dealt with in my life are going through a faith crisis and raising my 5-year-old son who's on the autism spectrum. Both experiences have brought a tremendous amount of uncertainty along with a renewed outlook on life. My son is nonverbal and has a difficult time sitting still and learning anything in classes at church. What advice would you give a parent like myself about the benefits and drawbacks of raising someone with autism in the church?
In some ways, you can't find a more loving community. And in a way, you can't find a community that has a harder time grappling with some of this. We're human. I think it's important to have that grounding situation for both the parent and for the child. We need a home. We need a spiritual home. We need a place to call our own in many different fashions. I would recommend perhaps being a little bit more proactive in his ward and saying, let's have a few firesides and let's talk about this. Let's have one for the youth. Let's have a gathering for the primary. Let's have a gathering for the parents. Let's not stop at that, and maybe let's go in and talk to the stake president and let them know what life really is like to have a child on the spectrum. And that it isn't that we need pats on the back, but we need to have the door open and people that are understanding and not trying to dismiss things because they don't understand it. That may be the practicality of where we need good sermons and good talks. And to say, let's deal with the realities of this right now. We can have our hope system, but what is it that our neighbor is experiencing today?
It's a little bit sad for me to think about the extra burden that a parent of an autistic child or a child with autism might have to also now be educating all the ward. And it's kind of sad. Is there any training? Should there be special needs training of church leaders? Are you aware of any?
Oh,
Or is there none?
I don't see a whole lot. I think there are some people, because of their professions or something, may be able to enter in this arena more fully. I would say that I did see a miracle happen in my children's lives. They went to a public school, but it was a small one. It was kind of out in the country. And there was a woman there that wanted to take on disabilities. And so every year she convinced the school to have Disabilities Week. And leading up to it, there would be readings of different types of things from Helen Keller, and who happens to be interred in Washington. So there were field trips and all sorts of different types of things. But the school would talk about the different abilities and accepting classmates that had different abilities, and maybe they wouldn't run as fast, maybe they wouldn't read as well, maybe they had speech, but whatever it was, a greater acceptance. They would bring in for school assemblies individuals that were in wheelchairs that played basketball or volleyball and that were champions in their field, people that would have physical disabilities or may have been on the spectrum. It was interesting to see what happened in that school and the support that our children had by their classmates, because this one teacher stepped forward to educate the school community, and the parents of the kids got involved in it too. So it was a really interesting, transformative thing. Why can't we have that type of thing to some degree in our wards and our stakes?
So like a ward special needs specialist, or a stake disability specialist.
Possibly.
Is that
yes, that could be.
Like a calling?
It could be a calling.
We have employment specialists. We have PR specialists. Why not a disability specialist?
And I think that could be a very wise way to move forward with this. We could maybe do something that would be.
They could train leadership. They could train low-level leadership, mid-level leadership, parents.
But maybe we could be even more organic in what we're doing. Could there be conversations in the Cub Scout pack or the Boy Scout pack? Could there be opportunities of taking the young men, young women, and going to Children's Hospital? Could there be an opportunity of putting on a prom for individuals with disabilities? Could there be different events where people are interacting and that they can see a new normal and that they can appreciate people and that they don't talk to the person pushing the chair, but the person in the chair, literally and figuratively? I think there's a lot
service
of
projects. How about service projects?
Oh, service projects, yes. There could be so many different types of things that can be done.
And in the curriculum, lessons, priesthood lessons, Relief Society lessons, youth lessons, primary lessons, that maybe went a little deeper.
Right. And I'll probably get called out on this one, but maybe a few less lessons or fewer lessons on obedience, but more on taking initiative in the appropriate ways that we should to include our brothers and sisters. And that could be having talks about things. But let's make certain that we look at our language too. So it's not, I've been asked to give a talk about those with disabilities, and there was this sweet little person there and that sweet little person, and we know that no, to give the real life experiences and how somebody has encountered somebody and how they feel, and maybe share the podium with somebody with a disability, and that they could both be talking about something. So you create a new normal, and so people can be seen and heard.
One of the most moving memories I have of my time in Logan, there was a family, the Christensen family, with a child named Shawnee, I believe, who was severely disabled, and I don't even know what exactly the condition was, but she was in a wheelchair, and her hands were kind of shaped in this sort of way, and her speech was very difficult to make out, but she had an iPad with little icons, and it was kind of programmed, and she could communicate with that. So she could bear testimony and say, push the button, I'd like to bear my testimony, and then she would say, I love my family, and then she would say, I'm grateful for the scriptures, and I love Heavenly Father, and it was always one of the most moving parts of testimony meeting when she would bear testimony.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. And
And Keith built his own ramp in our chapel.
love it.
They let him build a ramp
Love it.
so that Shawnee could go right up.
And could we make building a ramp a project that the young men and young women could do?
Or an Eagle Scout project.
Or an Eagle Scout project.
Wouldn't that be great?
Oh, it certainly would.
Love that.
See, you're thinking in the right direction.
You're helping us all think in the right direction. So thank you. All right. So there, I grouped a bunch of questions into harm and sort of positive. And there's so many people that have had bad experiences. It's kind of shocking. But like Pete writes, the church was a terrible place for my son. The guilt and shame I feel for exposing him to that environment follows me still today. What do you think Pete might be talking? We don't want to speak for Pete, but
I don't know. One thing that I think we haven't necessarily addressed, and that's bullying. And I think sometimes, rather than not doing anything, that an action that is taken can be a damaging one. Oh, you can't do this. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, you're too fast, or you're too slow, or put it whatever it is.
we're just being mean, playing tricks,
Oh,
right?
yeah. And then
Calling names, right?
And then having the parents of the perpetrator saying, oh, but boys will be boys. Pardon me, but I think boys can be very well-behaved boys if they understand what's in their environment. That very often I think these negative behaviors are because of fear or not understanding something. And if somebody understands something and that there is human feeling behind their actions, or that somebody could suffer as a result of their actions, that the individual learns more, and that the individual that could be the target may have a much more hospitable place. So I don't know if that's what he's talking about, but I would say let's watch our language and let us not enable people to be unkind.
It's kind of Christianity 101.
Yeah, basically it is. Do unto whom?
Yeah. Candace, this is kind of heartbreaking. She writes, I raised my 23-year-old son with autism in the church. There were some good and some very bad experiences. Teased and bullied and excluded. He is moderate to severe and will always live with me. I have many things I could touch on, but the biggest regret I have in staying so long is the shame and guilt he has about masturbation. He questions whether he will go to heaven all the time because he was taught this is not acceptable to Heavenly Father. Teaching any young man or woman that they're unclean because of masturbation is so sad, but placing the pressure on the shoulders of mentally handicapped youth that will never experience sex in a relationship, that they must go their whole life in abstaining, can cause harm beyond comprehension. I've spent years, we stopped taking him 4 years ago because of the stress it placed on him, and I left permanently a year ago, reassuring him that it's his body and that it's okay. He still feels the need to confess to me. There is a deprogramming process that has to happen for us all that leave, but for someone with autism and the OCD that usually occurs with the disorder, it can make that process extremely difficult.
Oh, my heart goes out. This is a type of frank conversations that we need to have. And it's the type of a conversation that bishops and stake presidents need to be part of. Because I think we need to examine things very, very deeply. I think a lot of the things that we deal with today were feelings and conditionings of a bygone era, and people not necessarily understanding the broad implication of their narrow language. I am so sorry that there is this pain for this young man. And what are the alternatives? And what is the pain? This is a conversation that we could take a long time to work on, that is very common within the autistic population, because some people feel that there is a need for physical companionship, and there was even a nice movie done, Autism in Love. And there are all sorts of other types of things that might be appropriate answers, that if you try to put somebody into a pigeonhole, and say, this is how I've been conditioned, so I've got to condition you to where I've been, is very unfair. And we could get into a whole lot of things. This may not be the time and place to do it, but there are serious conversations around all of these issues with disabilities.
I think the thing I'd love to hear you just respond to is, it's one thing to be neurotypical and to have these doctrines and policies that sometimes wreak havoc on all of us, right? But I wonder if there's sort of this inability to grasp metaphor and abstract versus concrete, where some religious teachings can become horrific.
Oh, yes.
To a person with autism.
Oh, yes.
Does that make sense?
It certainly does. There are things, if you are limited in your reactions to another individual and you aren't able to really formulate a relationship, and that is part of your wiring of who you are, who is it to describe maybe what happens in one's own bathroom? I couldn't be a monitor, but I don't know if there's a right for anybody else to be a monitor either.
And I'm also talking about death and the afterlife. And, And just all these doctrines that can be harsh, but might even seem harsher, or the judgment day. I just wonder how a person who's less of an abstract thinker might receive just some of the fundamental teachings of the plan of salvation. If you're taking care of the biological
needs that God has given you and you feel like you're going to be damned, that's a heavy load to carry throughout one's life.
Because maybe a neurotypical person might go, well, they don't know for sure, but maybe someone with autism might not be able to do that sort of distancing. That might any sort of sin or any mistake or any extra burdensome. I'm just speculating.
I think you're on to something that is a huge topic that should be addressed, and it would, I think, take a long conversation to examine the nuances of that. But I'm so sorry that has happened, and let's hope we can get past it.
There's a lot of comments about members looking strangely or members being annoyed about the disruptions. Would it be reasonable for a member to say, look, it's nice that you want your son or daughter here in sacrament meeting, but truth be told, they're probably not getting a lot out of it. And it's making it so the rest of us can't just enjoy the peace that we've all come here to enjoy. What would you say to someone who, I mean, no one would ever say that, but I can tell you people would think it. And if somebody thought that, how would you gently coach them?
Well, I think there's a number of things, and I'm trying to remember the scriptural reference about making a joyful noise unto the Lord. Who's to say how somebody expresses themselves in an environment? It may be that somebody has worked so very hard to put aside all of the stimulus that has been hard for them to be able to come into a quiet environment with everybody sitting stone cold silently, and that they've worked as hard as they possibly could, and that it is many times greater effort than the person in the adjacent pew. Where is the greatest devotion maybe being found? Is it in the effort of trying to somehow conform or to be in a space where the encounter with the divine is hoped for? And maybe we need to look at our tolerance level in certain types of things, and that people may need to separate the difference between somebody doing something because it's a neurological situation or an ill-behaved child. And yes, I have had both in my life, and I know that there are kids that sometimes push the issue, and maybe they're reacting thinking that if you just discipline this child, everything would be just fine, and I would be comfortable if you would do your job. We've got to get past that and to give allowance to people.
Lori writes something sort of, she encapsulates some of the things you've mentioned, but it's strong and it's kind of heart-wrenching. She writes, "My experience with raising an Asperger's child in the church has been overwhelmingly negative. I found that most people act like autism is some animalistic disease that is contagious. I still can't understand this mentality. We decided to be advocates in our ward for spectrum disorders. We tried to use our callings to help people to understand autism and how they can help families with disabilities. With no success and continued mockery of our son, we realized that the LDS Church was not the place where our son could succeed. He hasn't been to primary in over 2 years, and no one, primary, bishop, scout leader, primary teachers, has asked about him. It's like he had nothing to offer, so he didn't exist. I know others who have similar experiences and others who have opposite experiences. Ours broke the camel's back. Our advocating for our child created wedges between us and our ward members, mostly made by us, I admit. My ideals of a community that wanted and was willing to be a part of raising our children were crushed. Not having a sense of community made it easier for us to leave after finding out it was all lies anyway." What would you say to Lori?
I would say Lori is writing beautifully. I would like to see her send that letter to her bishop or bishops and to the stake presidency. They need to hear it. I would hope that she may be able to find comfort within the community. But if not, I would hope that she might be able to share enough that others don't experience her pain. And we all need a place to belong, and we all need whatever type of a spiritual home we want, and to have some people deny that. I think it's a point of education, and I don't think it's necessarily her responsibility to be the educator. I applaud her where she's done it, but I think some well-placed letters and some sensitivity could go a long way, and I would hope that they might receive her letter and do some self-examination.
One more sort of on the negative side, then we'll do some positive, because there are those as well. Frederick writes, "I'd love to hear her thoughts about adults that are on the autism spectrum. I'm married to a woman who's on the spectrum and is a recovering Mormon," meaning she's left the church or post-Mormon. "The Mormon church has devastating effects on my wife. Any thoughts she could share about adults would be greatly appreciated." So I guess this is probably a higher cognitive functioning person with autism who maybe has been racked as an adult with torment from their participation in the church. That may not be your experience with Madison.
Well, but there's some commonalities. We're women. And put on top of that, autism, I think there could be some huge things. And if you think in a more concrete way, I think maybe some of the things that we accept on face value could be very problematic to somebody who has a slightly different worldview. And again, is it right, is it wrong, or is it just a different way of looking at things? And I would hope that there's enough space in the tent for all of us. And I don't know if I could offer any advice. I can say that it must be very hurtful. And I don't know, sometimes it's hard for neurotypical individuals to cope with either priesthood or relief society. When Mormonism is at its best, it is glorious. But with our expectations of things being wonderful, when it falls short, I think it is extra painful. And I don't know if that's what she's experiencing.
To end on at least to end on somewhat of a positive note, there are many people who express that the church has been a very positive thing in their lives. Ezra writes, someone had written something really negative earlier about sort of the church being an awful place for people with autism. And he writes, "I'm not sure if you're aware or trying to be self-contradictory or not, because this person had also said all autistic people are different." And he basically notes, "But I find it funny you start off by saying one very important thing to remember is that every single person on the autism spectrum is different, but then conclude that Mormonism sucks for all of them and their families. Actually, as evidenced by my brother's family, who has an autistic son, that's simply not true. So
Good.
Ezra's saying that for some autistic kids or some autistic families, they have good experiences.
Right, and I think there are some very good experiences, and I know some situations where families have been enveloped with a great deal of caring, and that there has been an inclusion. I think even though within the good aspects of inclusion, that there's still more that can be done that would be positive. But I think there's some good people doing some good things, and sometimes we hear more about the negative things, and we tend to, well, even in the news, if it bleeds, it leads. You know, we talk more about the difficult things sometimes than the positive things. They're there, but the church, like I say, at its best, it is absolutely wonderful, but then we have some variables, and that happens to be people. But I think people can be taught, and I think people themselves have the potential to learn. And I would hope that podcasts like this and other conversations that we could have in the church would help us to fill the greater measure in being an inclusive community where all can worship.
Amy writes, I feel grateful for my autistic son being raised in the church. He has a very close group of friends he socializes with every day.
Love it.
They all met in primary. My son would not have close friends if it weren't for the church. He does not naturally go out of his way to make friends. He's in 10th grade and still very close with these guys. The church also gives him opportunities to serve and other things that have helped him grow. I do not know if he will stay in the church as an adult, but so far I see only good things from it.
I love it. I love hearing that. And that's when it's at its best.
Kevin writes, and I just want to give equal, or at least
Good. Go back and
good
forth.
time, yeah.
Yeah.
Kevin says, I have a friend whose adult son was embraced by their ward. He was included in all activities and passed the sacrament with great reverence. The bishops he'd had treat him like family and have been supportive through thick and thin. From the time of his birth, the ward surrounded the family with love and encouragement. I was also in this ward, and although I'm no longer active, I still feel loved and supported. So, yeah. So the good things too, right?
Yeah, and there are variables. We're human beings. And we talk about the spectrum, and maybe this is where we can learn something from the spectrum, that there is a great variability within the profiles of individuals on the spectrum. There is within the church as well, in the neurotypical population. And maybe we can learn from this more exaggerated, concentrated situation for greater tolerance for everybody, and to open our minds and open our hearts. Wouldn't that be a positive thing to come about?
I love it. Couple more quick questions. This is a specific one about missionary service. How did the parents and children reconcile the every worthy able-bodied issue for serving missions? I have a young boy on the spectrum, and I'm terrified of this teaching as it applies to him. I've never had the courage to ask others in the church their thoughts. I'm wondering if he's worried that when the time comes for the boy to be considered for missionary service, he'll be deemed unfit to serve. And what that would be like for a parent or a child, either to worry about that or to experience it.
Well, there are some positive things that are happening. And I think we need to have even more. But there are various types of missions that people are being called to. And sometimes those are local, where somebody can live at home and they can work in different situations. I know of one situation where a young fellow was working with a cannery, and he would spend a portion of his time there, and that he would be home and that he would go out, I think sometimes with some of the missionaries on some calls, and I think they were measured to some degree. But I think there are some accommodations, and sometimes staying a little bit closer to home is one of the answers. I do think that some of the people that we saw within this whole bevy of missionaries that came out to the farm, that there were some that were on the spectrum, and some performed much better in a more protective situation or a more controlled situation. And if we can see that there maybe are many different ways of filling successful missions, we may need to look at our definitions of what success really is. And if somebody is working 3 times harder than somebody else, but they're not appearing to be the same as somebody else, again, if we're looking at that reward system, whose reward is going to be greater? And then do we have the right to criticize because the measuring stick that is being used may be an inappropriate one for everybody?
This is probably the hardest question I'll ask you. It's kind of harsh. It's from November.
Okay.
And she says, I turned down amniocentesis with each of my 5 pregnancies because I believed what I was told, that, quote, we all get the spirits we are supposed to, end quote, and that, quote, abortion is murder unless your life as a mother is in danger, end quote. When I miscarried, I was made to feel unworthy by my bishop and also told that my child was a perfect spirit that didn't need to be tested by others. Now I realize that much of these so-called perfect spirits can be attributed to genetic and environmental factors and have nothing to do with my worth as a human, nor did they have anything to do with my worth as a Mormon. Also looking back, if she had been told it was as hard as it was to raise kids with autism, would she have gone through with her pregnancy? What if she had been convinced that she would not go to hell or be a martyr if she hadn't? Would that have changed her choice? What beliefs does she hold that helped her to make a decision regarding her child that she may have ultimately changed or that she feels would not have changed? And I think a way to summarize that is, with medical advancements, we may be able to detect autism in the embryo, in the womb. And if there were an option someday of aborting a child, if autism could be detected, do you have thoughts around that? And I imagine as a progressive person, you are pro-choice, maybe in terms of abortion. And so do you have thoughts or opinions around all? I know it's super intense and complicated.
It is a very complicated one. And I would say I'm basically against abortion and very much in favor of choice.
Both.
Because I do know of situations. I had one friend whose child, upon ultrasound, they detected there was half of a head. And my friend was getting older. And the decision was made that the pregnancy would be terminated because the child would not be born alive. Or they didn't think it'd be born alive, or immediately upon birth. Their decision happened to be that the pregnancy would end because she would have more of an opportunity to heal and be able to have children and to have a family, where it may have been in question. So it wasn't exactly the life of the mother, but it was the life of the family. I'm never in a million years ever going to default or criticize her decision. I do think a lot of things are done casually. Right now, there isn't a test for autism that is prenatal. There isn't one after birth either.
Yeah, so we're a ways away from this reality. Okay.
Yeah, and how's the baby behaving, because so many of the indicators are behavioral.
Right.
But I think these are very personal decisions between the woman, the family, and God, and I can't step in on it. I just can't. And I think with a lot of prayer, a lot of faith, that the right guidance can be had, whatever that decision is. Now, I've got to say, in our situation too, even if I would have known that there was autism, so little was known about autism, how would I have had any idea what the path would be? And Madison is a vital part of our family and of who we are. And I can't picture our family without Madison.
So in a fictitious world, if a parent could come to you and say, I've been told that I'm going to receive an autistic child, but I have the choice of not having it. and let's just say they weren't a person of means. Let's just say they were flat middle class, and it was going to be a significant, not only physical burden, but maybe even a significant financial burden.
And how do we know? Because she could give birth to an individual who may never be able to communicate and be in a corner, or she could give birth to a Michelangelo or a Steve Jobs. We don't know. That happens to be part of the birth lottery of any child. And right now, that's exactly what it is within the autism framework. There are some very gifted and incredible people. There are some people that suffer absolutely greatly. We don't know enough about it. So I cannot formulate an opinion without knowledge.
But could you look this parent in the eyes and say, I would much prefer to have had my life with Madison than without Madison?
Oh, yes. Yes, and that's what I would say.
I
would say that exactly that. Because of who he is, and I see the gifts that he's bringing to this world, and I see the lives that he's touching in many different ways, and through his art, and through who he is. And I see him as a gifted teacher. He's been teaching us incredible lessons. And I could not picture life without him. And yes, I would do it again. Now, some of the things that I did along the way, I would change. I would go for more earlier intervention. I would have jumped in with more of the classes. I would have pushed more for better speech development. Maybe I fought for it, but I didn't fight, I guess, hard enough. I think there's a lot of battles I would have waged to help with even a stronger outcome for Madison. But I think the world's a better place because Madison's been here.
And you and your family are better people because of it.
I hope so. I can just hope so. But he's a pretty incredible kid in many ways. And it doesn't mean that there aren't those moments at 2 a.m. that you're saying, this is really hard. Really, really hard. But neurotypical kids. How many parents have lost sleep over their kids?
Oh, yeah.
Does that mean we wouldn't have any children?
Right. This has been such a beautiful and a powerful and a wise interview. I'm just so thankful. And I'm thankful to all those who joined us on Facebook and who are joining us asynchronously as well. I guess I just wanted to thank you for being willing to share Madison's story and your story and Greg's story and your family's story with us. Thank you for all the work you're doing on behalf of people with autism. It's been a real honor to have you share these things with us, really sacred. And to close, I guess, are there any final words you would want to share with our audience? It can be from a faith or religious perspective. It can just be from an autism perspective, from a wisdom perspective. If you had final comments just to share, what would you say?
First of all, I would like to say thank you for giving voice and for opening up a couple of your sessions here to addressing this issue, because more needs to be done. I think if anything with dealing and working with autism, I would say let's learn. And let's learn that maybe there's more than one right way to do something. And maybe our autistic children or brothers and sisters, both as siblings and as members of the church, may have lessons for us to learn. And if we can assume the role of being a student and not feel that we have to be the one that's always right and the teacher, but to learn, I think there's a lot that heaven may make available to us, and that we all might be just a little bit better having been on this planet.
All right. Well, JaLynn Prince, it's been a real honor to have you on Mormon Stories. I want to thank everyone who's joined us on YouTube, on Facebook, or through iTunes or your podcast app of choice. I want to thank everyone who supports the Open Stories Foundation to make all this possible. Your donations literally keep us alive and support the staff that makes all this possible. So if you support us, thank you. If you aren't yet supporters to Mormon Stories or the Open Stories Foundation, please go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button. $10, $20, $50, $100 a month, whatever you can afford, really makes the difference. So please, if you enjoy this programming, if you value it, if you want to see it continue, please do support us. Also want to thank Cody Layton for his work with audiovisual and production. We were grateful to have Shay Allen help us a little bit with our cinematography. So shout out to Shay. Thank you to her. Thanks to everyone, the OSF board and staff, Amy Grubbs, Sharon Price, for all that they do in the Open Stories Foundation. And please tune in again for more Mormon Stories. Please email us if you have ideas for topics you want to see us cover. Please share Mormon Stories with friends so that we can get the word out. Please like us on Facebook. Our Facebook page is Mormon Stories Podcast. Please give us positive reviews on Facebook. Also, please give us positive reviews on iTunes. You can go to Mormon Stories Podcast, give us a 5-star rating and a positive review. Those really make a difference as well. Check us out on Twitter, Mormon Stories, and also on Instagram, Mormon Stories. And we're just always grateful for your feedback and support. So thanks for joining us. Sure love you guys. And we hope you'll join us again soon for another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care, everybody. Thanks, JaLynn.
Bye.